Does that make sense and sort of help
It
through
makes
it?
sense, but I don't agree with it.
Okay.
I really firmly believe that, as I said, fructose is the number one source of calories, and the second part of the equation is that that 90% of the food that people are choosing are processed foods.
Mm.
Fructose is pervasive; it's in all the foods, and it's not obviously apparent. That's the challenge. It's hidden in the ingredient. So it's, in my experience, it's large. It's not large numbers of people, or certainly the majority of people, are going to be aggressively looking at the list of ingredients to find this. And if they're receiving this surreptitiously and they're not aware it's in their diet, I still maintain that you could be the best mindfulness person in the world, and you're going to have physiology that's going to make it a real challenge, if not impossible, to apply these techniques. I think you're beating your head against a wall unless you can address the biochemistry.
Hmm. Well, that hasn't been our experience. I completely agree that what people eat is very, very important. I think what they eat, how much they eat, and where they spend their energy are all important, but they're only three of the decision steps that go into deciding what to eat. And I think for many people, and I would say that my perspective is a bit different from yours in that although what people eat is important and out of balance, I think the thing that's often missing from any weight management plan or strategy is to really help people gain self efficacy and awareness about how they make decisions. So the decisions they make are important, and the kind of information that you're suggesting may be extremely important for a particular person. But if they don't also deal with these other issues, then it just becomes information that they don't follow. So let's say that you have somebody who's really been struggling, and they figure out that they've got way too many carbs or sugar in their too much sugar in their diet, and they decide they're not going to eat it anymore. Well, what happens for many people is they end up falling into this yo-yo pattern where they're motivated and they want to feel better and they want to lose weight and they've gotten good information, and so they wind themselves up tight on this yo-yo and try really hard to follow all the rules. Then, if they do have underlying triggers or reasons that they eat because they've been struggling, they've learned they're disconnected from normal hunger and fullness and have learned other emotional connections to food, then when stress gets too great and temptation gets too great and somebody shows up at the office with donuts or some other favorite food, then their willpower drops and then they eat that food. They feel guilty. They think to themselves, well, I've already blown it. I might as well just keep eating. And their yo yo unravels and heads back down toward the bottom again. Once they get to the bottom and feel bad, they say, oh gosh, I'm such a bad person. I shouldn't be doing this. It's making me fat. I got to stop doing it. And they wind up on their yo yo. The problem with that is that the majority of people, at least in my world, and it's maybe very different from people that are really seeking out just health information, but in my world where people have struggled and they've gotten a lot of information about what health effects are of different foods, they often will find that they can't sustain that restrictive eating pattern for prolonged periods of time. So they end up what we call yo-yo dieting. A yo-yo can't stop in the middle. There's no moderation or middle resting place. So it's just up and down and up and down. So what I really try to focus on, and again, this may not be right for everybody, but what we really focus on is helping people think about a pendulum instead, where there may be variations in your eating pattern. You may undereat sometimes, overeat other times. Maybe that kind of fits into this intermittent fasting you were describing earlier, but that ultimately their goal is not to try to eat perfectly all the time, but their goal is to try to narrow the arc of their pendulum. So they're not swinging so wildly from one direction to the other, but they find a more sustainable, smaller arc in the middle where they feel energetic, they feel good, they're enjoying their food, they're beginning to choose more natural, more whole foods because they find that they feel better and it actually begins to taste better to them as they become more mindful. And that they begin to become more physically active. Because one of the other symptoms of this yo yo pattern is that people will punish themselves with exercise for eating, or they'll exercise to pay penance when they've eaten something bad or to earn the right to eat. And so oftentimes they'll develop even not just a struggle with food, but they'll also yo-yo exercise where they're on the exercise, off the exercise, or they say they hate to exercise. So again, by finding a more balanced approach to these decisions, they can sustain the healthy behaviors. And what happens is that arc in their pendulum actually gets smaller over time. They find that they're less interested in overeating. They're less interested in eating a lot of foods that don't leave them feeling good. So I think it's important to look at the full perspective of eating for people who've really struggled. If they're really just interested in nutrition information, then I think that's an important piece of it. But when they have these emotional connections to food, I find that it's so beneficial for them to explore those in addition to how the foods they're eating are feeding into the process.
I'm not really disagreeing with any of that, but I don't think you understood what I was seeking to communicate. That it's not like an either or. That everyone, I believe, everyone has both of these components. They have the emotional component, which you just described,
Mhm.
and they also have the
Mhm.
physiological component. And
Yep.
and they need both. If you just have a if you're a world-class mindfulness person, you ignore the physiology and the types of foods, you're going to fail. I don't care how good you
Yeah,
are at it.
I agree. No,
I'm not saying
I agree.
it's the only aspect. Clearly,
Mhm.
it's not the only aspect, and that's why so many people know. And the reason I invite you on here is that so many people know and understand what to do, but they can't do it because of
They
the
can't do
emotional
it.
factors.
Yep, exactly.
I totally understand that, and you'll run into that. But I'm just saying that you
It's
have to
both.
be careful. You have to be
Mhm.
careful if you're seeking to apply these, and you still most people understand what these are, but there's a significant portion of the population who are really ignorant because not necessarily because of their own uh, fault necessarily, but the tremendous amount of corporate deception that goes on to really deceive people at a very deep level about the truth of what the food they're eating. So, and it's not easy. We're all challenged with time pressures, and it's so much simpler and faster to buy convenience food or eat at a restaurant than it is to even what appears to be healthy, but it's because it's processed, it's loaded with other materials biochemically that are going to push your physiology in the wrong direction and make it a real challenge to apply these. And then I'd like that come on to the exercise too, because it's another one of my passions, deep
Mhm.
passions for like the last 5 decades, is
Mhm.
that most people, in my experience, I would say well over 80% of the people who are exercising incorrectly. They're doing this crazy cardio, which is really not improving their health. They're really destroying their health at a deep level in the long term, and they're not getting the benefits that's really going to change their hormones and their physiology to the point they're really able to start burning fat effectively and to normalize their balance of hunger and satiety hormones so that they're able to make these choices and apply the skills that you're teaching. So
Right.
I think it's a marriage of both.
I do. I
And
totally agree with you. And I think part of the issue and the reason that we approach it from this perspective is that for many of the people that we've worked with, they've tried really drastic measures,
Mhm.
and knowledge for them, as you said, is not enough to change behavior because there are so many complex things that are driving that behavior. So although we may ignore, that's not actually accurate. We might postpone uh, any major changes in the diet initially. It's only because what we want to do is help people start to recognize thought patterns that may be keeping them stuck in old behaviors,
Mhm.
so that rather than starting, and I think it's just a different way of approaching the same problem. You might choose to start with what people are eating. I choose to start with why they're eating, but then both of us have to address other issues, or we're only
No,
taking care of part
I
of it.
wasn't seeking to prioritize it or place
Yeah,
a higher emphasis on one or the other. I just was seeking
it's
to
both.
help people understand it's both. And I suspect that the order is really individualized. For some people, it's going to
Mm,
be the biochemistry. For some, it's going to be the emotional component. So I don't know
that's
that you can
true.
make a
That's
hard and
got
fast rule.
true.
So it's always about customizing and individualizing for the
Mhm.
person. But you have developed an expertise in this very crucial, important element that really many people need to understand to apply. So if people wanted to know and understand more about what you're doing and how to adopt and apply your principles to their own personal circumstances, how would they be able to do that?
Well, we try to provide a lot of free tools on our website, which is amihungry.com. So that's amihungry.com. And there are a lot of things. There's a lot of articles there. There's a quiz that people can take to try to really assess what their own eating cycle or eating style is. Are they primarily in an overeating pattern, a restrictive eating pattern, or an instinctive eating pattern using hunger and fullness cues or some combination, so that once they have that awareness, they can, as you were talking about, figure out where to prioritize. If they're eating instinctively according to hunger and fullness cues, then it's probably more important for them to start with what they're eating. But if they're really struggling with overeating and chronic dieting, then they're going to want to look at why they're eating first and then address the what once they've started the path of addressing the why. And then the other thing that they'll find there that's free for helping them kind of get a better idea of what's going on is if they click on the online shopping cart, it has the first chapter of Eat What You Love What You Eat available for download so that they can read it for themselves. If that first chapter doesn't resonate for them, if it just doesn't, if they don't really relate to what they're reading there, then this is not the approach for them. As you said, it has to be individualized. But if they read that first chapter and they say, as so many people do, it felt like you were walking in my head, or were you sitting in my living room, it really is important for them to kind of take a look at these other issues that go into their decision making. So all of that's available on amihungry.com.
All right, well, great. And I just want to close by saying, emphasizing, my beliefs that to an encouragement for people who are struggling with these issues to persevere, because there's just no doubt in my mind. I've committed the majority of my life, the vast majority of my life, to understanding this process, and I can tell you confidently from my own experience. I'm sure Dr. May could also echo these comments that once you identify it, once you get it down, hunger is not an issue. You're feeling so much energy and have so much
Mm.
joy in your life, and you and passion, and you're able to do what you want to do at a highest quality form and function. And you can actually, when you optimize it, you actually start to reverse the aging process. Your muscles and your brain become younger, not older. And at 60, you could have the brains and muscle of someone who's 30 if you understand this. If you don't, and you don't apply these, you're definitely going to go in the wrong direction and be predisposed to lots of chronic diseases. But there is hope. So it's application of both these principles that can really change you and your family's life so dramatically, so that you can absolutely take control of your health.
I couldn't
So
agree more. I think that people get stuck in belief that there's nothing they can do. They've tried everything. But there is so much to this, and there's so much we can do. And it's that vibrant, abundant, full life that we all crave so deeply that begins to reinforce those behavior changes long term. So yeah, don't give up. Keep trying. There is help available.
yeah, and you're never too old. My mom
No.
is now 76, and she just didn't even start weight training until she was 75, and now she's just doing
Wow.
phenomenal. It's changed her whole life. So yeah, I don't care if in your 70s and your 80s, you can start this now. If you've had 70 years previously of not being able to successful, life's a journey. You got to go out there and find the tools and resources and work with it, and you can be successful.
No doubt, no doubt. Somebody said to me earlier, "Why didn't anybody teach me this sooner?" And I had no answer for her. All I could say was, "Well, you know it now." So
Yeah,
that's
that's
what
the key.
matters.
So don't kick yourself for not learning it or knowing about it earlier. Just do it,
No
because you got
regrets.
the rest of life in front of you. So
Right.
thank you for your work and effort, and your resource information you've given earlier. So if people need or would like to learn more, they'll certainly go there.